Hi, everybody. Today is the next to last session in our course, which very briefly, but in more detail than usual, presents the groups and the events and individual artistic fates in our post-war history. I thought it would be important to present today for our judgment certain trends that developed at the beginning of the 2000s against the backdrop of the developing market, the strengthening institutionalized system, and to a certain extent, a reaction to this institutionalized system emerging was the space, then the escape gallery, and the escape program, a group made up of 4 people. The group came about in 1999, and it included individuals that were very different, unlike each other. Valery Eisenberg, who generationally belonged to the Moscow artists that worked throughout the 70s and the 80s, the younger authors Bogdan Mamonov and Anton Litvin, that were close on the Moscow landscape of art in the 90s and Lisa Morozova, a very young artist, a PhD in therapy and art therapist, who decided to change her profession on the change of the decades, discussing the modern artistic situation together, the authors of very diverse works. For instance, Bogdan Mamonov was mostly a painter. Lisa Morozova would organize performances. In 1999, she started a course of new artistic strategies in the Institute of Contemporary Art. And they all did completely different things. This is something that's very important to understand. But what brought them together was that each of them individually and all of them together in that artistic situation, in that artistic context, they felt rather out of place. They weren't inscribed into the contemporary artistic process because they weren't collaborating with institutions that existed at the time, and what they were doing wasn't interesting for these institutions at all. Against this backdrop, looking at the context of the artistic work, the members of this group came to the conclusion that the main strategy should be to hide instead of being in the center, in the limelight, and being vulnerable, trying to bypass the mainstream of the time in order to dissolve in reality in the field of visual art that was picking up in Russia. It wasn't even a decade after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but the streets were filled with advertising and neon lights. Television was at the peak of its development. There were more and more exhibitions. There were more and more glamorous events. And the artists of the escape program that were going against the trend opted for a strategy that was very reminiscent of the idea that the Moscow actionism started off with, the expropriation of the territory of art, that would be formulated in one sentence, one slogan that was subsequently included into one of the manifestos of the ETI movement. And it is as follows. An excessive object is a symbol of truth. If you're not part of the system, then you conquered the system. If you were on the periphery of various harmonious structures, then it means your career was a success, something like that. This is very reminiscent of Kolobkov, Monastyrsky, and Kabakov, but that's a new stage of artistic school development in the regions. One of the first works that the escape group artists put together happened in Valery Eisenberg's exhibition hall in the Nagorno. It was the first artistic event that placed another self-organized structure on the map of Moscow. In the 90s, we couldn't observe the development of self-organizations because there was no institutions. As soon as there were institutions, we could follow self-organizations as well. Based on this project in 2000, Lisa Morozova organized a project called Lisa and the Dead. In a single space, she brought together all of those that you could call characters. And it included these characters, Heracles, Jeanne d'Arc, Diogenes Caligula, and others. And these were the people that in their lives demonstrated how you could be above all sorts of artistic performances. Each of these characters are a performance in themselves. For a viewer, it was completely unclear what she was talking about, because what they would see was a space that looked like an average Moscow apartment with a study, a computer, a chair. But across the space, you would see the signs of the characters that the artist was talking about in the manifesto that remained a secret up till until a certain time. In this photograph, Lisa is holding a mug with Tolstoy's portrait on it. Although she seemingly is drinking tea, she's just drinking tea, having a cup of tea. But then in the forefront, at the expositional level, we see a character that she's thinking about at the moment. But we can't pick up on this in the exhibition field, just as the Casanova model that we see in the background. Lisa Morozova declares the presence of all of these characters, but at the same time, she's hiding them in this everyday situation so that the viewer doesn't get a ready-made image that's framed and deciphered and commented and brought, but tried to extract these characters from this mundane landscape of the artistic work. Chipayev, the little bag of snacks. Another work that developed the escape concept, the concept of escaping, disappearing. This is a performance by Valery Eisenberg and Bogdan Mamonov. It was called Disappearance. It happened in the summer of 2000 at Tsarskoye Selo during the Cock Art Festival that was then held by Yuri Norif Sobolev that we talked about in the previous sessions, the veteran of the nonconformist movement. And during the performance that was organized by Eisenberg and Mamonov, one of them with a camera was following the other, and the goal of the other was to run away from the first one and escape from the filming. This is a very literal escape from being visible. This breaking away from visibility, self-representation, and a static image. Instead, it's replaced by the disappearance in the park or in the interior of a workshop. It doesn't matter. It's all down to vanishing. Gradually, the idea of disappearing, of opposing the mainstream exhibitionist urge to demonstrate everything through these non-stop exhibitions was signified by another gesture, a performance by Anton Litvin that took place in the Zversky Center of Contemporary Art. It was called Everything You Saw But Weren't Able to Stop. The viewers would come to a space within the center. It was an extended, lengthy garage-type building with a low ceiling, rather empty. And they didn't understand what they were being offered to see. They would be served wine and snacks, and only then the artist would invite those that were willing to do so to go behind the curtain, where they would see that the space of the center continues behind the fabric, and there's a rail track, and there is this cart on the railway that you could sit on. And then the artist, in a very dedicated manner, would push the cart forward so that it quickly goes down this artificial corridor. The main goal was to make sure that the viewer doesn't have time to see the things that were hung on the sides of this corridor. These were Anton Litvin's works that he had created prior to 2000. The faster the trolley would move, the less you would be able to observe how these things were made. Anton Litvin perhaps considered them not too significant. One of the central topics of the escape program, as you might have noticed already, was this dissolving of the artistic life in the art itself, how the artist itself turns into art. And the topic of communication within the artistic community was also quite important, and a lot of the projects within the escape program were built on the interaction with the viewer. In 2001, Escape opens their own boutique in one of the large exhibitions, and everything that we see, they each had their own space with the everyday things. Eisenberg's matches, Litvin's telephone, underwear from Lisa Morozova, old boots, etc., etc. All of these things were up for sale, and there were people that were willing to buy these souvenirs for their recollections. Posters would also be up for sale that would advertise the artists themselves and their favorite places that they were inviting their fans to visit. For instance, going to the Moscow region to play in the autumn leaves, to run around the Red Square, at great speed, etc., etc. The object of art is missing in this case, with the exception of the characters themselves wearing their red uniforms that are willing to take the viewers for a walk, are willing to share their old phones, but there's no object of art, it seems, at all. The burden of art is moved to a transitional zone between the artist and the viewer. That's where the meeting of the viewer and the author happens, and this endless communication is initiated in an attempt to recreate the concepts that were the basis for the work of art, together with the artist. Again, not quite an exhibition, it's a travel agency that was allegedly set up by Litvin, Morozov, Mamonov, and Eisenberg. Each of the members of the group would promote their own tours, continuing this theme of a boutique. In 2001, the Escape program brings in Anatolia Smolovsky, a foreign agent considered by the Russian watchdog to be an honorable foreign agent. And it's Osmolovsky, as part of his interaction with the Escape program, was able to conceptualize, theoreticize the art that they were creating, and he coined the term of non-spectacular art. It's a continuation of Guy Debord thinkings about the society of the theatre. Instead of organizing exhibitions, instead of having monographical exhibitions or performance festivals, you could get back to the strategy of leading a dialogue on art, as was done by the medical hermeneutics group back in 1970s, 1980s of the 20th century. This is exactly what the new generation is doing. This is an information banquet in Eisenberg's workshop, lots of food, lots of drinks, and the leading artistic critics of Moscow invited to the gallery in order to discuss the existing artistic situation, perhaps criticize it, perhaps demonstrate its potential instead. And this was a way to, again, hide the object of art and transform it essentially into a dialogue on the subject of art. At the end of this performance meal, the table was empty, and there was not much to document it. Anatolia Smolovsky, having conceptualized the trajectory selected by the Escape program, he picked up on it and carried it further. Together with his co-authors or solo, he created a number of works that would highlight his acceptance of the concept of non-spectacular art. And in 2001, he organizes a first work in the series at the Art Moscow Fair. In one of the stands, he takes down a work by Yuri Albert, a printed graphical work, and he takes it to another stand and he faces it to the wall. Nobody noticed this loss, but there was a change, an invisible change to the exposition. The moment when the painting was returned, it changed again. And this invisible gesture, unnoticed by everyone, transparently changed this well thought out machine of commercial art. called Art Moscow Fair. Another event was organized in the Central House of Artists, similar to Art Moscow. Anatoly Osmolovsky organizes a project, a number of interventions. He highlights his presence, invisible presence, in the exhibition called. The work was called Imposition. A part of the project called the Imposition were unread books, folded up flags. These are revolutionary red flags that lost to the world of capitalism, and the works of the thinkers of the leftist Friedman movement covered with a thick layer of dust, forgotten in the corner in a big pile. This work would only be noticed by those that knew about the project. For many, it went by completely unnoticed. It was completely escaped from the space. Anatoly Osmolovsky raised "You Cursed Hungry Slaves." An operation was performed in the Central House of Artists. A board that was nice and healthy was replaced with a piece with wooden spikes folded up, and this was covered with red paint, just as if the floor was a living being that needed to rise. Only those that knew about the work would notice it, just as with the previous work, and the workers of the House of Artists that had to replace this piece of wood with a new one. In 2002, Anatoly Osmolovsky organizes a whole series of works across various exhibitions with a thin layer of dust. He covers the walls. The various Kunsthalle quotes from the works of the leftist thinkers, Karl Marx, Lenin, the structuralists of the 1960s, and the language of the country that he was in. He would choose very strange locations for his slogans. They came through almost unreadable. It was really hard to make out the letters. They were created from this ephemeral material. It was very hard to read. This was his contribution to the global artistic process, where he represented a new trend in Russian art. However, funny it might sound, in 2002, non-spectacular art becomes an object of spectacular events. The more unnoticeable the work, the more spectacular it seemed. The first exhibition was organized, dedicated to non-spectacular art, was organized at the center, this very center in 2002. It was called In Place of Art. And it looked like a completely empty space with benches along the walls and a broken window and garbage in the corners. And it turned out that one of the benches had one of its legs shortened. The broken glass demonstrated a stone stuck in a crack by Tatiana Hensler. It was called Tanya Come Out. There was a keyboard on the windowsill with the escape button ripped out, and this was a collective work of the escape program to demonstrate their meanings. Because if you are escaping, you're taking the escape button with you. It was a deciphered exhibition. Each of the viewer had to identify these objects that were hidden from view. that were mimicking against the color of the walls. And another exhibition was called 100% Vision at the Regina Gallery, where similar works would be exhibited. The gallery was half empty, or you would see such works as the Kiss magnified 100-fold. It was so pixelated that looking at the wall, it was hard to make out what exactly you were looking at, just black dots, it seemed. The less visible the work of art, the louder it was speaking up for itself, and the more it would attract the attention of the viewers. For 1 or 2 years, non-spectacular art would capture the interest of the audiences. Sometimes it would be part of exhibitions, or there would be individual performances. One of the works from 2003 was organized by Valery Eisenberg and Bogdan Mamonov, called New York, reflected in the goods on. The viewer that would come to this event didn't really understand why they were invited. Maybe perhaps have a cup of tea with the owner of the workspace. Everything was in its own place. There would be old works by Eisenberg on the walls. Seemingly nothing changed. There was very unusual bright lighting. And then subsequently, some of people would start to guess that we weren't looking at the lamps themselves or the paintings, but rather the shadows that the paintings were setting. This was the piece of art, and this was a very recognizable landscape of the Manhattan skyline. It turns into a sort of tribute. By 2003, the twins were no longer existent. The participants of the escape gallery themselves in 2004 quickly step away from non-spectacular art as a strategy. Moreover, having become noticeable figures of the Moscow artistic process at the beginning of the 2000s, they start to receive more and more offers to participate in various group Russian international projects. They have to put in more and more efforts in order to get back to more spectacular art and the less blurred boundaries of what an artistic work is, thanks to the curators of the Russian pavilion, Lyubov Saprygina from Nizhny Novgorod and Olga Lepokhova from Moscow. They created their interactive installations called Too Long to Escape. I wasn't there at the Biennale, but those that were there at this international exhibition said that the work was a technical failure. The concept was as follows. The viewer would be in one of the spaces of the Russian pavilion at the Venice Biennale. They would see a video projection. You would see 4 red figures appear on the horizon. They would approach closer and closer, and the wind picks up from the direction of the screen. When the members of the escape program start to resist the wind and they move forward and they fall into the snow, they are knocked down by the gust of wind, and the viewer would experience a similar effect. They couldn't approach the screen to study it in more detail. And the technology would come to the fore, how to create this gust of wind that would keep the viewer away from this work of art. Non-spectacular art was so popular. It sounds like a poem. Some of the artistic institutions, some such as the Institute of Contemporary Art, would have theses or organized on various non-spectacular art concepts. Ignat Daniltsev and Alexei Sverilovyev, students at the time, would curate an exhibition in the subway. They would only accept works that could hide in this habitual entourage of a subway car. There was an imitation of the buttons, emergency buttons to call the driver. There were various ads of the Styx travel agency that would offer a trip to Baghdad with no insurance. I'll remind you that there were serious military events happening in Iraq at the time. And all types of ads that at the beginning of 2000s you would be able to find on the walls of various metro cars. Alexei Kalima, an artist who came to Moscow from Grozny at the beginning of the 2000s, also paid tribute to non-spectacular art. One of his well-known works was called The Chechens at Art Moscow. It was a provocation on his part, together with his friends, dressed up in very characteristic sports costumes and military camouflage coats and black hats, came to the Art Moscow exhibition. And they sat in the corner of one of the stands. They started playing cards, squatting in a characteristic manner. And people stopped coming. Nobody wanted to come close to the source of danger as they perceived it. The people would try to stay as far away from them as possible, up until a point when one of the gallery organizers asked Kalima and his friends to leave the building. One of the most popular series of the time was a photograph of a multi-layer artistic work that I presented at the customs when I took it to an exhibition in Prague. This is a part of it. These are two other parts of it. We can't see anything on them. And the customs loved it, and they let it through without any questions asked. But let's see what they would say if they saw the work installed with ultraviolet lighting. What you see on these panels is are glimmering images. These paints can't be seen in natural light. The story was a series of victories of the national Chechen team at various soccer competitions. It wasn't just a sign of peace, it was a sign of a victory of the Chechen Republic after its collision with the bigger empire. Another important community forms a bit earlier, still connected to Kalima. These are young people that gathered around Taraganyan. After the end of the project at Trechprudny, there was a lot of interest towards the fate of art per se and its role in the life of people. Towards mid-90s, he became very leftist. He would organize artistic discussions, debates that brought together Osmolovsky and other theorists of art. In the 2000s, it all started back in 1997 when Avdei Taraganyan decides to create a group headed by himself. He invited his sons, David Taraganyan and Ivan Brashkin. They went on to invite their classmates, their friends, and now you'll see names listed here that are quite well known today. Valery Chtak, Pavel Mitenko, Alexei Baldakov, a wide circle of people that over the next decade and a half become leaders in the Moscow artistic scene. I have asterisked the ones that were the nucleus of the group. The others participated in various performances from time to time. The Radix group existence begins with a manifesto in 2000. Oh, something I omitted, something that's very important. For Avdei Taraganyan, these young artists that came together around him and formed a group, he considered them to be his disciples. So it was called the School of Contemporary Art. He would teach them to organize scandals at exhibitions properly, to create simple art objects, to create non-conventional art. For Osmolovsky, these young people were clay, like a lakmus paper to testing thinkings of the artistic youth. He called them non-governmental control committee that would research various points in the internal politics of Russia of the time, trying to resolve some of these complex matters. There was a barricade that was organized in Bolshaya Nikitska. This is 1998. They were able to be out there for 2 hours at least before being sent away by the police. The manifestations of the Radik group didn't get any permission from the city officials. It happened at the crossroads of the street that crosses the Golden Ring, starting from the Vastania Square. There was no underpass, so there would be a huge crowd forming, waiting for the green lights. And when the crowd started to move, above their heads, there were slogans that were raised with completely absurd slogans. Sex marks, Karl pistols. This is a slogan from 1990 of the expropriation of the territory of art, or 700 rubles to everybody. This was one of the more noticeable events that they organized, but they spent a lot of time together working on communication technologies, forms of bodily interaction. They organized sellotape parties where the performances interaction of the artists would be fixed by another member with sellotape, and this would bring about these strange figures that would be reminiscent of a crab or a mantis. Radek mostly focused on an artist's ability to interact with their co-authors in order to achieve the needed results. How was Alexei Kalima connected to the group? Back in 2000, Alexei Kalima gets half of a huge basement in a multi-story building around Kurskaya. He gets it for free because he teaches at a children's school pro bono not far away. This basement was restored, and they decided to use it as an exhibition hall. Alexei was not part of the France Gallery himself, but all of the others Radek members became part of this community that was called the France Gallery. This gallery existed for almost a decade. They would use it to experiment with new technologies of creating exhibitions, various discursive innovations. And there was a whole generation of Moscow artists that grew and developed in these walls. At the beginning, they would experiment with non-spectacular art throughout the course of their lives. In the gallery, Chtak, David Turaganyan, none of them really paid attention to being visible. They weren't aiming to be commercial. They were more focused on the more sophisticated matters of the soul. In a number of reviews written about the work of this generation, they would use the word quiet, quiet schizophrenics, or just quiet. This is what they were referred to as, and they were less fierce than the previous generation of artists and poets, that's for sure. The previous generation would stop at nothing to change the status of contemporary art, its language, its addressee. For the quiet generation that came to the fore at the beginning of the 2000s, the goal was completely different. Through various means, they were attempting to focus on the most important existential matters without any scandals, without any loud performances. The first exhibition that was organized by the France exhibition participants was called A4 format, as Kalima would write about it later on. It came about because they just didn't know what to do. Kalima is one of the creators of the gallery. Back then, asked each of the participants to bring their heart rate stenograph, and this is how they came to organizing this horizon line from all of these heart rhythms. The spirits of performance was not just part of the Escape Gallery, it was also part of the France Gallery. In the new year of 2002, they would spend it at RT1, RT, art, and party. These two words are morphed together in RT. The first RT was dedicated to the new year of 2002, and each of the participants brought a Christmas tree, a live tree to decorate this underground space. Having decorated this underground space with a Christmas tree, they decided to celebrate and they turned it into a work of art by the group. Another interesting work that was organized by Alexei Kalama in France, You Are Where You're Not. Again, this is 2001, when people were really into the non-spectacular, although there was a lot of spectacular elements to this project, as you'll see. The exhibition hall was separated into two parts. One was a catwalk, a runway, and there would be armchairs for the public that was seemingly there to watch what the artists of the time liked to wear. And each of those entering the gallery turned to be a model, and they would be applauded not as an artist, but as a living artifact that was walking into an artistic space. It could be an unknown artist or Joseph Backstein, as you'll see in one of the photographs, and they would graze down the runway to join the audience and applaud the next guest. Radek included people with very different gifts, and I would like to talk about two of its participants in more detail. A very talented and promising back then author, David Taraganyan. He learned everything from his father. He went to the School of Contemporary Art starting from 1997. He didn't consider the language of contemporary art to be something that he wasn't familiar with. It was all clear to him. He quickly made a highly successful career. He got a lot of invitations to international exhibitions and Russian exhibitions. This operation series was displayed at the Prague Biennale in 2005. What we see here are geometrical forms, arrows, crosses. It's very reminiscent of a map of a terrorist attack or an anti-terrorist act. Either way, it's abstract art that pretends to be a conspirological scheme of a counter-terrorist operation or planned explosions. And it was very relevant at the time. Another similar terrorist work was represented at the first Moscow Biennale in 2005. The series of work was called It's Not a Bomb, rephrasing René Magritte, Ceci n'est pas une bombe. This is the Lenin Museum where the main project was organized. It's a very obvious interpretation. A citizen living in a very frightened city. Let me remind you that there were explosions happening one after another, terrorist attacks. By mid-2000s, they were declining in number, but there was still relevant, and a lot of people would get scared by seeing this pumpkin with wires inside it, all covered in tape. Of course, the viewers would expect that this potentially could be some kind of artifact that presented a threat to their lives. And this meant that emergency response teams could be called to the scene until they were hidden. David Turganyan worked a lot on topics that were heavily relevant for the society politically and artistically. He was a revolutionary. Throughout this period, throughout the 2000s, they had no strategy. Unfortunately, I don't have the photograph, but one of the followers of Moscow actionism that we didn't talk about too much because it is a very sensitive subject, a very ambiguous one. Actionism was almost over in the 2000s for various reasons, but there were young artists that picked it up and that looked at Osmolovsky, Pimenov, Turganyan, and their decade of experience. One of these characters, Anton Nikolaev, together with his friend, nicknamed Bambila, organized a pair manifestation in Polyanka Square. There was a big slogan that said, "We don't know what we want." And that was really true. The idea of a self-sufficient revolution wasn't too convincing anymore. So the revolution as a utopia that could change the world for the better was fading and disappearing, but for David Turganyan, it continued to be the foundation of his poetics. These characters are made up of geometric forms. Riding a bus, on the opposite wall, they would turn into a rebellious crowd with guns, calling for a revolution. David wasn't just working on such radical things. He was the first one who worked with the mobilography, the first touchscreen drawings. He was one of the first to master that. He had some quite formalistic works. For instance, this work called "A Set of Colors," where he was photographing various sheets of color, shiny color with a flash, and this would lead to this big white spot dissolving into a color. It seemed like it was turning into some kind of cavity, creating an illusion of depth. These works are currently in private collections, but at one of the exhibitions, he showed the series in its totality. Many of these works are now held by private collectors. It's called the Black Geometry, and it's not abstract art at all. These are silhouettes of African countries that colonialists cut up arbitrarily, not just dividing lands that were profitable for various colonizing states, but breaking up families and lives, leading to a lot of sad events in these African countries. And they ended up looking like unnatural geometric figures. Another artist who was part of the group. The School of Young Artists, as it was called by Turganian, Valery Chtak. Very early on, he formulated the direction that he wanted to pursue, and he tied his aesthetics to the street where he would hold performances. And the aesthetic ambience that started to develop throughout the 90s, having finally formed in the 2000s, the world of street art, the world of graffiti, street art objects, and this whole aesthetics of street art. At the same time, Valery Chtak in his works would reference the legacy of the Moscow conceptualist school and the global conceptualist school. In his works, he used a lot of inscriptions in various languages. He would use object integrations. He interacted with the street culture at the level of objects and visual forms. This is perhaps one of the well-known works by Valery Chtak. A lot of his works have turned into memes, not just in the professional community, but among young Muscovites or among young people across the country. His artistic language was very much reminiscent of the language of the streets, encapsulated in a workshop. The Center of Creative Industries was a factory where he organized a ramp decorated with his images, and they would actually hold real competitions there. Another trend, completely different, is also seen at the beginning of the 90s. As you will have noticed, the majority of artists that we've already had time to talk about were mastering the basics of art, not at schools, but through direct interaction with senior artistic generations. Like the old craftship relationship, or through autodidactics throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The Radic group and those that were close to it were part of Turganyan's House of Young Artists. They got some education. There was a trend towards organizing educational institutions throughout the 90s, and one way or another, there would be attempts to organize various courses for artists, curators, and art critics based on the Center of Contemporary Art. There was a school for curators led by Victor Misyan in the Institute of Contemporary Art. In 1995, they opened up courses for art critics, but they didn't really work, these schools for artists. And in 1991, both in Moscow and St. Petersburg, two organizational structures emerged. The Institute of Contemporary Art, organized by Joseph Backstein, and the Pro Art Fund, registered in 1999 in St. Petersburg. Both the Institute and the fund opened up courses for retraining for those with initial artistic education, or those that were theoretically educated. And there's a first graduating year. Starting from 2000 and up till this day, the Institute is the main source of artistic talent, supplying the Moscow and the Russian market with a lot of talented artists. Those that have graduated from the Institute in 2000 are famous nowadays. They are middle-aged Moscow artists, like Irina Korina, for instance. Despite the fact that in 1999 she was still a student, she was a qualified theater designer, and thanks to her acquaintance with Nasilina, the creator of the Excel project, Irina Korina was able to create her first work, and it was a breakthrough for the Moscow artistic community. It was called 29 Transformations. It was a small space at the Excel gallery. It looked like a pathological space covered by these swellings or beehives made out of small LED lights, and it was all accompanied by small photographs located between these wall swellings. It all seemed very physiological, very disturbing, although what you would see on the photographs are boutique shop windows with plastic grapes, plastic mushrooms and sausages of various forms. But what you would feel in this space was something disturbing, and Irina Korina was able to combine in her career both her skill of a theatrical designer and the knowledge of how work of art is created. She was able to achieve the required effect. Another work from 2003. Again, Korina organized it at an Excel gallery. What we see here are her preferences in terms of the choice of materials and this rather subdued effect from her interaction with the environment. Urangst, this is German for anger. This desperate anger described by psychoanalysts, not aimed at something, but it defines your inner feeling, your angst. As with street art, that was within the institutionalized space. For Irina Korina, the interior is always turned inside out, and the materials that she bought in a construction market, the roof tiles, this air conditioners and street lights are suddenly inscribed into a gallery space. The most difficult in this work was this floor covered with an artificial layer, rather wide boards, quite short ones that were layered and they were only fixed in the middle. So when you would step on this board, it would fall through one way or another. In order to see the entire space that was created by Korina, what you would have to do was constantly control your balance. A lot of the people didn't even notice that the ceiling was also part of the space. It was part of the representative space. To intensify this dizzying effect, a video was projected onto the ceiling depicting a skateboardist flying through the snow. There was something flickering on top. The floor was unstable, and the interior presented itself as an exterior. Of course, this work attracted a lot of attention to the artist. And the curator group of the first Moscow Biennale that opened up in 2005, where Corina in 2005 was able to organize a project called Module. Again, she used construction materials to create this model of cars superimposed as if there had been a huge traffic accident. But the degree would be brought down by materials that these car models were made out of, artificial plastic wallpaper. How would you call it? Plastic curtains for the bathroom. Or this sticky wallpaper imitating marble. Corina, you used these everyday construction materials that you would see in an ordinary house, and she created objects with it that juxtaposed these discourses. And it's similar to the shock therapy by Andrei Monastersky. Another work of art was very popular. It was called Top Model. This is 2006. There were several versions of this work. This is plastic mold. A lot of people that were present at the exhibition thought there was part of the interior that you could sit in, chat in, but in actual fact, again, this is a packaging from a cell phone that was enlarged multifold. In 2011, Irina Karyeva gets an award for Best Young Artist for her work called Representative Process. This is a huge volume of Play-Doh in a cube. Made of metal caging. When plasticine is heated, it would go through the wiring. And despite the hidden political subtext of this work, this artistic generation, this line in the developments of contemporary national art in the 2000s was rather apolitical, working predominantly with the formal presence of a work of art in a space, more concerned with the status of the work of art in the artistic process. Gradually by 2010, based on these practices of diverse escapist ideas, a new school came about that learned more from Western and American artistic practices than from Russian practices. And these are the characters that we're going to talk about next Thursday. Perhaps you have some questions. On the one hand, this is very political. On the other hand, there's no statement. If you have no statements to make, then I'll see you in a week. Thank you.